Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell. We are back again. And today on the show we have Fenibo Kalaiwo. Very happy to have him on the show. Fenibo came to America at age 18 from Nigeria. He's lived in Brattleboro for well over 30 years now, and he's a musician and a musical experimenter in both writing and performing. He's played many venues and festivals, solo with small groups, and even a 12-piece ensemble. Fenibo also worked with Adolescents for many years at the Brattleboro Retreat, actually about 35 years at the Brattleboro Retreat. And by the way, Fenibo means born on a happy day. Welcome, Fenibo.
Thank you, Wendy.
It's wonderful to have you on the show.
It is absolutely wonderful to be here.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. You know, I know that you're used to being in front of an audience, but it is a little bit different in a studio.
That's true.
Yeah, and you usually have an instrument that you're playing.
Hide behind the instrument.
And your main instrument is guitar, is that right?
That's correct. I did grow up with music. My father was very much into music, although he didn't play it, but he had an extensive record collection. And it was all genres: classical, country, rock, pop, tribal music, everything.
Oh, so you heard a lot of different kinds of music.
Yes.
As we said, you were born in Nigeria, mid-50s. You were growing up there from the 50s into the 60s. And there was a very turbulent history that was going on at that time.
Yeah, at that time, well, Nigeria, for people who don't know, from the 1500s to 1800s, Nigeria was one of the places where the slaves were taken from Africa to America. And then from 1901 to about 1960, Nigeria was ruled by the British. And then we went through a very turbulent period of civil war, basically, and about 5 military coups or changes of government. And in 1999, Nigeria became a democracy.
You did mention your name and how you were named.
Well, according to my parents, when I was born, I was very sickly. And the shaman told them that I was a reluctant soul, that I really didn't want to be born. And the tradition in my country is that the oldest person in the family is the one who names the child, because the oldest person in the family is going to where the ancestors came from, and the youngest person, namely the newly born baby, is just coming with news from the ancestors. And the idea is you meditate on the child, and you ask the question, who are you? How can we help you? What, you know? And after that, you come up with a name, and the name is supposed to enhance the kid's life. And my name was given to me by my grandmother. It means born on a happy day. And I think it was her attempt to reprogram what she saw as the birth trauma of a little boy. Yeah.
Your grandmother also was a tribal leader.
She was a tribal leader.
Yes.
And Kalaiwo, or Kalaiwo, as English people pronounce it, it means small but strong. She was short, but she was also a chief. So it was like a version of David. You know.
And so your family, you were the only boy in your family.
For most of the time. Later on, I acquired 2 stepbrothers, but I grew up with 7 sisters.
Wow. Your dad was a pharmacist?
That's correct. And Mom was a midwife. So a lot of members of our family were birthed at home. Wake up and you got a new sister.
And so she was a midwife for a large area? Was it your village? Or
Lagos. And I guess she was also involved in an orphanage called the Motherless Babies of Nigeria, which I didn't know about because that happened after I came to America. And when I went to her funeral, there was about 5,000 people at her funeral.
Oh my gosh.
And that's when I heard that she ran this orphanage, played a big part in this orphanage called Motherless Babies of Nigeria.
Oh wow.
So
she
was an uber mama.
Do you look at Nigeria as your homeland?
It's very difficult to say so. That's where I was born. That's where my roots are. That's where most of my memories were generated from. But growing up in Nigeria, like I said, it was a very turbulent, violent period in Nigeria.
Yep.
All the schools that I went to growing up in Nigeria were international schools. So I was much more comfortable with the idea of an international environment. But I do feel a certain allegiance to Nigeria because that's my home country. That's where I come from. But on the other hand, I've been in America so long, and I love America. America really is a beautiful, great country. And this thing called the American experiment and this amazing document called the Constitution is really something that influences the whole world. And when America is in chaos, the whole world is in chaos. So I pray for peace in America.
Oh, and you're not alone with that. Yeah, I know. And so when you were growing up, was America the ideal for you, the place to go?
I was much more focused on England at the time, and then, but then as I got to hear more about America, America just seemed much more attractive to me. The idea of the frontier, the idea of all this diversity, and of course, the promise of the American dream.
Yes.
Yeah. So all of those things made America very attractive to me.
So around the time of, say, graduating from high school, you started thinking of leaving the country?
Yes. And that was very interesting because I walked into the American embassy and I said I would like to go to school in America. And they said, well, what do you want? I said, what do you mean? They said, do you want coastal area, the South or the West Coast and all of that stuff? And I said, I would like a place that is that's got a combination of rural mountains and lakes, but also a proximity to urban areas. And I said, wouldn't it be nice? The guy said, wouldn't it be nice if there was a college right here? And he was pointing to Keene. I didn't even know there was a Keene State College. And sure enough, there was a Keene State College. And
so that was almost like a dart on a dartboard,
right? Yeah.
Right?
I told him what I wanted. Said I want mountains, but I also want to be close to the city.
Yeah.
So
you ended up at Keene State College.
That's correct.
And you were kind of on a medical track at that point, is that
correct? I got a degree with a major in chemistry, biology, but I minored in psychology and music.
When you came to America, even before you landed in Keene, was it a big culture shock?
It was. There's something about when you go to another country or to actually another culture, that your eyes are very, very attuned to the minutest detail. And I remember, like when the plane was flying over Italy, I remember thinking the vegetation and foliage in Italy was of a darker green than the green in Africa, which was a lighter, maybe a little bit more electric color. This one was a little bit more subdued. But then there's other things that I noticed. That, like I noticed that there were lizards on the lawn. There were squirrels on the lawn instead of lizards. little things like that. And then when I came in on campus, I also noticed some other things. I noticed, for example, that the college kids at that time would seem to be all dressed uniformly. It was long hair, blue jeans, and T-shirt. And I remember thinking that they're all rebelling the same way. And I said, if they're all rebelling the same way, it means they're all getting their information from the same place. So that was my first exposure to how the mass media shapes culture.
And you didn't see that kind of thing in Africa?
No, there was a lot more color and diversity on the streets of Nigeria. Nigeria is a very, very diverse country, very diverse. 356,669 square miles. And the climate ranges from arid sub-Saharan to the humid mangrove swamps on the coast. And there's so much ethnic groups in Nigeria. I remember when they would read the news would be translated into 12 different languages. I think there's 243 different dialects spoken in Nigeria.
And those are just Nigerian dialects. Those are
Nine.
not the other countries that have come in.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And it's no wonder that a civil war was fought, because Nigeria was basically this arbitrary geographical entity that the English just put together. And then after they gave us independence, all these cracks happened.
Right. Growing up, were you able to communicate pretty well with everyone, like at your school or in the town that you lived in?
Yes, because the basic language in Nigeria, spoken all over Nigeria, is something they call Pidgin English, which is English, but if you heard it, you probably wouldn't understand it, because it's a patois kind of English.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you doing? Because waiting you they do.
Uh-huh.
So it's a little different, but you would catch on to it. So that's like the universal language spoken in Nigeria.
Uh-huh.
But then it also helps to know a little bit about the main tribal dialects, Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba.
Uh-huh.
It also helps to understand that too. But yeah, you can communicate pretty well if you know Pidgin English. Huh? And also most Nigerians speak English.
So many influences growing up. Cultural diversity and ethnic diversity, language diversity. It's really quite remarkable.
And I think that also influenced the music.
Your music.
Yes. Because that brought me into the music of J.S. Bach. How did that do that? Well, Bach's music is polyphonic. Polyphonic means music that has many, at least two, but usually it's more than two melodic voices, independent voices moving on at the same time. Most music today is homophonic, which means that you have a dominant melody and a supporting bed underneath of chords and rhythm. And of course, the oldest music is monophonic, like Gregorian chant or tribal ethnic music, which is a single line. I was attracted to Bach's music because the idea of many voices all combined. In fact, somebody said it best. They said Bach's music was like a worldview of a place where the creator had created all this diversity, but also imposed a rational unity upon it. And I just find that very intriguing. It also helped that I grew up in Africa, which is the land of polyrhythm, which is the rhythmic equivalent of polyphony. Polyphony is the independent voices at the same time, and polyrhythm is the independent rhythms at the same time. So when you grew up with all of that, it kind of helps organize all of those things.
It's so interesting that you came to Bach, though, after all of that. And what was your introduction to Bach?
Well, that's very interesting because it was actually Jimi Hendrix. And I think this is where it gets really freaky. I was very much a fan of the Jimi Hendrix experience because I was just starting to learn to play the guitar. So I was just very attracted to his music. And I read this interview, I think he was in London at the time, and he was staying at a place, he was staying in an apartment that used to be Handel, the Baroque composer, Handel's house. And somebody asked him about music, and he said that it was a remark that just stuck in my head. He says certain kinds of music is homework music. You don't want to listen to it with people and be partying. He says certain kinds of music actually teaches you music. And then he said, just before he died, he said he wanted to create music that would be based on Bach, Muddy Waters, and flamenco.
Wow.
And I remember thinking about it. I said, wow, I can hear that.
Can you?
I can hear it.
Yeah, you could hear it.
I could hear it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so that
was your intro.
That was my intro. And then at that time, too, the biggest selling classical album, I think of all time, at that time was Switched on Bach, which was Wendy Carlos playing Bach on the Moog synthesizer. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I've never heard bass lines like that. This sounds so good. And everything was so clean and so crisp and so clear. I said, wow. And not many classical composers translate to other instruments. You know, it'll be very hard to hear Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, or anything other than the instruments that they were written for. But Bach's music is absolute music, and I've heard it played on everything: guitar, harpsichord, piano, synthesizer, anything.
That's fascinating. That's
Yeah.
very fascinating. And while at Keene State, you were getting into music in that kind of way. You were probably learning how to play the guitar
Yeah.
at that time too. You were president of the International Student Union there.
Yes.
Yes.
It actually was called the International Students Organization.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it wasn't a union. I know that's a political term now.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, that's how I got introduced to Brattleboro, because I used to have to come down to Brattleboro, and I think the International Students Organization.
SIT, yeah.
SIT was going on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember Brattleboro was a lot different than it is right now.
Yes.
There was a very, very strong, vibrant artist community, cultural community.
Mm-hmm.
There was always something going on in Brattleboro.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a nightclub. Remember that time?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
nightclub and theater. A lot of theater
Oh
going
God,
on.
yes.
Yeah.
It was an amazing experience
Yes.
coming to Brattleboro.
During this time, were you playing to audiences?
Yeah, but sporadically. In fact, the music thing happened because of the students at Keene State College. When I came into Keene State College, I lost all my luggage in London. I finally got it back after 6 months, but initially I didn't have any clothes, so they took me to the basketball player's house, because the only people who were tall enough to lend me clothes that fit. But I was playing the guitar. I was playing my roommate's guitar one night, and somebody heard me. And then 2 days after that, I got a gift from the kids at Carl Hall, Keene State College.
Mm-hmm.
They bought me a guitar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I got this. Wow, he needs to have a guitar. So.
And did that come to you pretty quickly and easily, learning how to play?
Yes, because initially I learned it, what did it call it, by ear. But
Right.
I also learned it visually. And then when I started taking music classes, I was able to integrate both of them.
Yeah.
And I was much more attracted to the classical guitar, because it was a much more complete way of playing music.
Mm-hmm.
And if you learn to play the guitar with a pick, you're restricted to single notes or chords.
Uh-huh.
But if you play with your fingers, you get more textures and a more pianistic texture.
The way Bach influenced you, could you feel that kind of polyrhythmic, that polytonal thing coming in?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that Bach influenced me was a spiritual aspect, because he believed that, I don't know whether it's cool to talk about spiritual things nowadays, but Bach believed that music, the highest aim of music was to the glory of God and the recreation of the soul. And he didn't make any distinction between secular and religious music.
Yeah.
They all had the same JJ, Jesu Juva, which is Jesus helps, or ING, in the name of Jesus. And his Christianity was not the conventional religious Christianity. It was a mystical.
Yeah.
I think it was called pietist.
Uh-huh.
And it was based on love of Christ. I guess that's what he called it.
A kind of transcendence that comes with that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that too also influenced my music, because Bach believed that the music had to address what he called the three parts of a man. In the Old Testament, different words are used for soul and for spirit. And as far as I know, this is my own interpretation, the soul is memory, intellect, aesthetics, and spirit is the longing for transcendence. And Bach believed that the music needed to address those three parts of a man, of a woman, or whatever. And the music had to address your body.
Yeah.
It also had to address your soul, the memory,
Yes.
intellect, aesthetics, all of that.
Right.
But it also had to address, and this is the one that is more difficult to articulate, that part of you that longs for transcendence. It's very hard to put that part in words because it's like the Tao. The Tao says the Tao which can be named is not the Tao.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
So
right,
you
right.
have to keep that mystery there and just call it transcendence. But
And it's really wonderful that you can express this in music. You know,
yes.
so you don't have to use words. You don't have to go into those kinds of explanations. You can
Exactly.
feel it. Yeah. So in Brattleboro, you're in Brattleboro, and you start working at the retreat with adolescents in the retreat. How did that happen?
Well, I needed a job.
You needed a day job,
I
right?
needed a day job,
Right.
you know, and that's how that happened. I just stayed there because you get comfortable with the community there. There was a lot of really amazing people,
Yeah.
you know, who were working at the retreat at that time. You know, it takes a special kind of person to do that job, and
Yes.
I made some very good friends there.
Yeah, and you had also in your studying and the medical sort of track you were on, you also did some psychology and you studied Jung a little bit.
Yes.
So you brought that with you to the retreat.
Yes, I was much attracted to Carl Jung.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was I guess it was the antidote to Freud, which I wasn't as comfortable with, but I did study that too.
Yes. Yeah. Being at the retreat, working with adolescents, the whole mental health arena that you were in, you were able to stay in there.
Yes, barely sometimes.
I'll bet. I'll bet.
Yeah.
Because it was very physical as well.
Yes. Yes. I thought that's a whole other show.
Yeah, yeah, I'll bet it is. Recently, Fenibo, in the last few years, you've been on your own medical healing journey.
Yeah. Well, in 2017, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I had surgery for it, and but it kept on coming back. And in 2022, which is this year, I underwent radiation therapy for it, and that finally took care of it. And for the first time since 2017, I'm cancer-free. And
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
It was a profound experience. It changed my life forever, and it is just one of those things that it's just gonna never leave me in terms of the effect that it had upon me. And it gave me appreciation of and for life, and an unwillingness to get bogged down by trivial BS, pardon my French, and just more focus. You know, you take things for granted when you don't know that you don't have all the time in the world.
Right, right.
So that's my journey.
Yeah.
And I kept it secret, not because I was antisocial, but because I felt that it was important that I didn't get labeled as a victim.
Yeah.
I felt like I would get dragged down by people saying, "Oh, he's that guy who," you know, and I just didn't want that label dragging me down and weakening me. So in a way, you know, when you have that kind of label, there's a tendency to buy into it, to play the victim, and that weakens you. That takes away your fight. That takes away your resolve. So a lot of my friends were shocked when I finally told them that I'm cancer-free. So I didn't know you had cancer.
Well, I think it's a really brave move, you know, to have done what you did. And I'm sure that you got a lot of support in many ways through BMH, Brattleboro Hospital for one, and I would think that you would hold certain friends close during that time.
Yeah, well, you learn who your friends are, basically, when you go through something like that.
And where you're comfortable. Yeah, the places you're comfortable.
Yeah, the people at BMH were amazing. They were just amazing.
Yes.
And they deal with the most extreme human conditions on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Fenibo, I know that, like me, you've been around Brattleboro for a long time, so you've seen a lot of changes. And I often ask people on the show, what kinds of changes you've seen, how you feel about Brattleboro, how it supported you. And I think that the things that you've done in town over this period of time, working with kids at the retreat and music, being in that arena, you've seen the changes. So what are you seeing these days?
Well, I'm going to go to Mr. David Byrne from the Talking Heads, who has a book out which everybody should read called How Music Works. And in that book, he talks about how you can't have an art scene if you don't have affordable housing. At the time when Brattleboro was a really happening place, there was affordable housing. And so David Byrne, in his book, he talks about how music you always have to be aware of the context in which the music is being created in. And that's the reason why you have the New York scene, the Los Angeles, the San Francisco, Soho in London, because those were all areas where there was affordable housing, and so the musicians and the artists could thrive in that area. Brattleboro had that, and it was just magical witnessing that through the 80s, through the 90s, and some of the early 2000s. It started to wane, I believe. I think Vermont Yankee had a lot to do with it. I think more than the town people would like to admit. This is my own perspective. This is not scientific or anything, but just my own personal opinion. I feel that when Vermont Yankee first came into the area, the rents went up because all of a sudden the landlords saw that they had this pool of scientists and engineers that could afford more expensive rents. So when that happened, that was the beginning of the demise of the cultural and artistic scene in Brattleboro. There was a time when you could walk down Elliott Street and hit about 4 or 5 different places playing different music, jazz, blues, rock, reggae, world music. It was all happening, and it was just wonderful. But then it just slowly died. And when Vermont Yankee was decommissioned, I thought the rents would come down, but they didn't. The rents remained up.
Right.
And then what happened after that was a gradual gentrification of Brattleboro, where a lot of these buildings were being owned by what I call absent landlords. People from New York and all those places. And it hasn't really bounced back from that.
Right. And we've had the pandemic in the middle of that.
On top of that. So Brattleboro has just, it just needs a little love, I guess. That's how I can explain it, because it's just not what it used to be and what it could be.
Yeah.
And so that context is very important. And the affordable housing is a big deal. If you want to have an art scene, you have to have affordable housing, because a lot of these young kids and artists cannot afford the rent.
Well, I think that's the main thing about what you're saying. It's younger people are not able to have a place to live that's affordable in town. And having younger people in town is what brings vibrancy to it. I think that's kind of the next focus for Brattleboro. We've got groundworks there in Windham-Windsor Housing Trust. We've got a lot of great things in place. And I think turning the focus to kids who are in their, people who are in their 20s and 30s, who really need that kind of support in town.
Do.
Yes. And you've seen it, I've seen it firsthand too, in getting support in the 70s and 80s. Fenibo, this has been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure too.
Wonderful to talk with you and to hear your stories.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wonderful to talk with you too and have this opportunity.
We
Hi, Brattleboro.
Thanks to Fenibo, and thanks to all of you for being with us today. Stay tuned. Brattleboro is still ever-changing, and there's always room for more. And Fenibo is around and bright and shiny these days, so keep an eye out for his music as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back.